Presented by the committee is the following, and it starts with Charlie. Do you support making the Bush tax cuts which favor the wealthy permanent? And if yes, why?
I absolutely favor making the tax cuts permanent for one very good reason. Every single time in this country when we've cut taxes, whether you're talking about John Kennedy, whether you're talking about Ronald Reagan, you're talking about George Bush, the amount of money in the federal treasury has increased exponentially. Fact of the matter, the problem that we've had, whether you're talking about John Kennedy or even in the Reagan administration, was runaway spending. Runaway spending. I understand President Reagan had to sometimes come to deals with the Democratic Congress so that he could break the Soviet Union. I understand that part of politics. I understand why President Reagan did what he had to do when he had to accept the greater spending. But we have to get spending under control. We have to stop earmarks. We have to be against earmarks. We had a debate this afternoon. And I said there, I think it's very important that at the very least, we put a moratorium on earmarks for a year so we can sort this out. Probably ought to put a moratorium on it forever, because politicians have the tendency to, like they say, when they figure they can give largesse on the public treasury to the people, the politicians are going to do it, and a lot of people are going to take it. But we need to stand up and take a principled stand. We need to stand up and stop the earmark process. Thank you.
I think there's a general problem with the U.S. tax code. It's 60,000 pages long. And when you talk about exceptions of any kind, it's hard to really define who benefits and who doesn't. I think 60% of Americans actually benefited from the Bush tax cuts. And I agree with Charlie, when you cut taxes, revenues go up. It's a good idea. But I think you've got to look at the rest of the world right now and see what's happening in the rest of the world. 14 EU countries are moving towards flat taxes, right? Former Soviet bloc countries are getting away from progressive income taxes, which we have here, and moving towards fair taxes, flat taxes, consumption-based taxes. I think this is all for naught because many of us get confused by 60,000 pages of taxes. It's a $300 billion a year industry just to fill out our taxes. So I think we've got to actually become more competitive in the global world. And truly, the only tax that's fair to everybody is the fair tax, a consumption-based tax. And professionals and economists say that if we go to a fair tax, $13 trillion of offshore money, which basically went out there through all those loopholes currently in the IRS tax code, would come back. $13 trillion. This is the kicker, though. After all that we've heard about globalization and the movement of companies out of this country, 500 companies would come back to the United States to do business again, including 3M, which left some time ago, would come back to the United States under a fair tax. I think it's time we start getting more competitive with the rest of the world. When our corporate tax rates are 35%, we're getting close to France and Germany. I mean, that's the big problem. And when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton start talking about increasing capital gains tax, we have a bill on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, H.R. 25, called the Fair Tax. It's a bestseller on the New York Times, written by Neil Bortz and John Linder, who sponsored it. I am going to go down to Washington, D.C. and say, you know what? It's time we reboot this whole system. It's time we upgrade it. And we go to something that can help us compete in the world that has truly embraced democracy and free markets. And it's a fair tax. I'll tell you that. And then when I look at our spending problem, 20% of Medicare spending is waste, fraud, and abuse. On the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal yesterday, they talked about the money laundering scheme the states do to rob the federal government out of more Medicare money. 20% of Medicare spending is waste, fraud, and abuse. Last year, you and I spent $5 million on a single wheelchair. We can fix Social Security, not by privatization, but by choice, by allowing young people and old people and people in the middle to choose what they want to do with their own money. So we have to take care of that entitlement spending problem right now before we do anything else. This has two pieces to it. A revenue-raising side, which I'm for the fair tax or a flat tax, and I'll help raise awareness about it, and also an operational side, which is make government more intelligent. Let's make government look like the business of this century and not the business of last century. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Next question again, the opposition might phrase a question. Corporate greed is responsible for sending many good American jobs overseas. What is your position on trade agreements like NAFTA?
Kind of just answered that. And I will tell you that both Ethan and Shelley, I mean, they do it. They hold, everybody running a business in this state, whether you run a pizza place or a barber shop, I mean, you are Enron and you are WorldCom and you're bad and corporate profits are bad. I mean, it's time we come back and go to bat and act in the defense of business and capitalism. The fact that profit is actually a measure of efficiency and how well you do things. And the fact that federal taxes are a greater part of your pain at the pump and state taxes than the profits. And the reality is, in all these solutions, it's a supply side solution, whether it's energy or our economy here in Maine. I've got a good story for you. I've been going door to door for 10 months now, and I was in Wyndham a couple weeks ago, going door to door, and I walked smack dab right into the middle of a Democratic household. The guy said, "I'm the chair of the local Democratic Party." I said, "Well, did you know Maine has the 48th worst economy in the country?" He goes, "No, it's the 49th." So I think when it comes to any of this stuff about business, Maine is the 48th worst economy in the state. We're the second most taxed state in the country, and we lose our young people at alarming rates. I think we've all lived this story long enough. And there's a reason 100 business leaders are now backing my candidacy, right? Because I understand that. And these ideas that Ethan, Shelley, quite frankly, anybody who's ever served in Augusta and not been able to affect any change, that's what got us to the bottom of the barrel. God forbid these ideas that we've had here in Maine from a business perspective on beating up on business and beating up on corporations get to the national level. Then we can say, hey, we're 49th in the global economy. Now, that's not where I want to be. But it's going to take somebody with a know-how and an understanding of business, modern business. And once again, I will tell you, I've worked hard at getting 110 small businesses behind this candidacy on this very message. Because they understand that I understand what it's like to be a business owner, I understand what it's like to be in business, and I can articulate these ideas when it comes to November. So thank you very much.
I think when it comes to NAFTA and trade agreements, it's important that we keep our markets open to the world. This is a global economy. The last thing we need to do is to fall into protectionism in this country. Protectionism ultimately will cost us jobs. You know, I remember when I was in the state legislature, when I was in the state senate, and I was serving with many of the people that you hear talked about today. And it was always amazing just exactly how pervasive it was in Augusta, especially on the taxation committee, how people would always say, well, just pass along the business. That's all right. It's just, all it is business and it's a write-off. You know, it just would demonstrate the clear lack of understanding that people in Augusta would have when you would come to business. It was amazing to see that. And I think that when you're talking about small business in this state, when you're talking about small business in the United States, it's important to get the government out of the way. It's important to get the trade barriers out of the way, because that's really the issue. You know, Dean talks a lot about the 100 people that supporting his, the 100 business people supporting his candidacy, and I think that's great, because about 25 or 30 of those on his list are supporting my candidacy as well. Why? Because they want Republican change. Why? Because they want somebody who has experience of running a business in the state of Maine. Somebody who has been in Maine. Somebody who has run a business in Maine. I've done that. Ran a business down in Biddeford. Ran hotels in Bangor. Ran hotels in South Portland. I understand exactly what it's like to sign the front of the check as much as it is to sign the back of the check. I understand what it's like to pay workers' compensation rates. I understand what it was like when I was in the state senate. And I stood up with 13 other members of the state senate and shut down the state government over the issue of workers' compensation. It was a very, very difficult thing to do. And I remember Anna Lee when she was chair of the committee here. And a lot of you folks were here when I first started running for the state legislature back in 1990. And I defeated a man who had served 7 terms before in a district that had never elected a Republican, because I worked harder than the next guy, and I'm working harder now. And I'm going to tell you, my wife worked harder while I was gone.